Rain poured heavily, turning the city into a maze of blurred lights and rushing streams. A sleek black Rolls-Royce idled near a curb, its engine humming. Inside sat Ethan Carter, a self-made millionaire impatiently tapping his gold-plated Rolex. A tap on the window interrupted his frustration. Outside stood a boy, drenched and shivering but holding a small umbrella. "Do you need help, sir?" the boy asked softly. Ethan sneered. "Do I look like I need help from you?" He rolled up the window, muttering, "Ridiculous." But as the boy stood there undeterred, he said, "Even the strongest storms need someone to hold an umbrella." Ethan drove off, dismissing the boy's words. Little did he know, that boy held the key to a lesson that would soon shatter his pride. Ethan Carter was not just any millionaire. He was the millionaire. His face regularly graced the covers of business magazines, his name invoked awe in boardrooms, and his wealth turned heads wherever he went. People called him the King of Real Estate, a title he wore like a crown. But Ethan hadn't always been rich. Born in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, Ethan had learned early on that life was a battlefield. His parents had struggled to put food on the table, and kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford. Ethan had grown up believing that the only way to survive was to win, and the only way to win was to outsmart, outwork, and outlast everyone else. By 35, he had built an empire that stretched across the country. Luxury hotels, towering office buildings, and sprawling malls. But along the way, Ethan had shed more than his humble beginnings. He had lost his sense of empathy, compassion, and patience. In his mind, weakness was a disease, and people who asked for help were either lazy or incompetent. Ethan's world revolved around power and precision. His days were a blur of meetings, deals, and power plays. Assistants scurried to meet his demands, employees walked on eggshells around him, and rivals watched him with a mix of envy and fear. That rainy evening was no different. Ethan was on his way to a meeting with Marcus Steele, another titan of industry. The stakes were high. If their deal went through, it would create the largest luxury real estate project in the country, a crown jewel in both their empires. Ethan had spent months planning for this meeting. Every detail had been scrutinized, every variable accounted for. Except one. As his car glided through the rain-soaked streets of New York, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was his assistant, Karen. "Sir, the documents for tonight's meeting are still in your office," she said nervously. "What do you mean, still in my office?" Ethan's voice was icy. "I'm so sorry, sir. The courier was delayed, and—" Ethan cut her off. "I don't care about excuses, Karen. Fix it. There's traffic everywhere, sir. I'm trying, but I don't think I can get there in time." Ethan ended the call without another word, his jaw tightening. He glanced at his watch. The meeting was in 2 hours, and without those documents, he would look unprepared, a cardinal sin in his world. With a heavy sigh, Ethan made a decision he rarely made. He would handle it himself. He instructed his driver to stop near his office building and stepped out of the car. The moment he did, the storm hit him full force. Sheets of rain drenched his tailored suit, and the wind whipped at his coat. Ethan gritted his teeth and hurried toward the building, his expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles. As he strode down the sidewalk, he noticed a small boy standing under a lamppost holding a tattered umbrella. The boy was soaked, his thin jacket clinging to his frame, but his gaze was steady. Ethan barely gave him a glance, but the boy stepped forward and tapped him on the arm. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need help?" Ethan stopped and looked down at the boy, his annoyance flaring. "Do I look like I need help?" he snapped. His voice was sharp and his gaze was colder than the rain. The boy hesitated but didn't back away. "It's raining really hard. I can walk with you and hold the umbrella," he said quietly. Ethan let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Kid, let me give you some advice. Life isn't about holding umbrellas for people. It's about being strong enough to not need one." He turned and walked away, leaving the boy standing in the rain. But as he hurried toward his office, Ethan couldn't shake the boy's parting words. Even the strongest storms need someone to hold an umbrella. Ethan shook his head. "Ridiculous," he muttered. In his world, storms weren't something to be weathered, they were something to conquer. Ethan pushed open the glass doors of his high-rise office building, muttering under his breath about incompetent assistants and unreliable couriers. The storm outside had left him soaked, his polished image marred by the elements. The building lobby was quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. As Ethan waited for the elevator, he glanced back through the glass doors and saw the boy with the umbrella still standing under the street lamp, drenched but unwavering. Something about the boy irritated Ethan. His persistence, his calmness, or maybe the fact that he had offered help Ethan didn't think he needed. The elevator chimed, snapping Ethan back to the present. He stepped inside, brushing rainwater off his suit, and jabbed the button for the top floor. The ride was smooth and silent, but his mind wasn't. Even the strongest storms need someone to hold an umbrella. The words echoed in his head, and he scoffed at himself for even remembering them. What did a kid like that know about life? He's probably one of those kids who grows up thinking kindness can change the world, Ethan thought. But kindness didn't build empires. Ruthlessness did. Meanwhile, outside, Alex tightened his grip on the umbrella. The storm had only worsened, but he refused to go home. His dad, Daniel, worked as a janitor in the same building Ethan owned, and Alex often waited for him to finish his shift. It wasn't safe to walk alone in their neighborhood at night, and Alex liked keeping his dad company on the way home. Alex wasn't like most kids his age. At 10, he had already learned how tough life could be. His mom had passed away when he was just 6, and since then, it had been him and his dad against the world. They lived in a small apartment with peeling paint and creaky floors, but Alex didn't mind. What he did mind was seeing his dad come home exhausted every night, his hands blistered and his back aching. "Why do you work so hard, Dad?" Alex had asked once. Daniel had smiled and ruffled his hair. "Because we've got dreams, son, and dreams take hard work." Alex had promised himself that one day he'd make things easier for his dad. He didn't know how yet, but he would. Tonight, he had spotted Ethan Carter's car outside the building and recognized it immediately. His dad had often mentioned Ethan's name, though never with admiration. "The man owns half the city but wouldn't spare a penny for the people who keep his buildings running," Daniel had said. When Alex saw Ethan step out into the storm, drenched and annoyed, he thought he might be able to help, but his gesture had been met with scorn. As Alex stood under the street lamp watching the Rolls-Royce disappear into the night, he whispered to himself, "He didn't even say thank you." Inside his office, Ethan retrieved the documents and prepared to leave. As he glanced at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, he frowned. The rain had ruined his crisp appearance, and his damp suit clung uncomfortably to his skin. He grabbed a spare coat from the back of his chair, threw it on, and headed back downstairs. The elevator ride felt longer this time, as though the boy's words were slowing the gears. Ethan clenched his jaw. Why was he letting something so trivial bother him? When he stepped into the lobby, he stopped short. There, near the entrance, stood Alex, still holding the umbrella. The boy turned when he heard the elevator doors open. For a moment, their eyes met. Alex's gaze was steady, not defiant, but not afraid either. Ethan felt a strange pang in his chest, though he couldn't explain why. "Are you still here?" Ethan asked, his tone brusque. "I'm waiting for my dad," Alex said simply. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your dad works here?" "Yes, sir," Alex replied. "He's a janitor." Ethan scoffed lightly. "A janitor, huh? Well, he should have taught you not to bother strangers." Alex tilted his head. "My dad taught me that helping people is never a bother." Ethan didn't respond. He pushed past Alex, stepping back into the storm, but this time he felt the rain a little more acutely. As his car pulled away, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy was still there, holding the umbrella. As the Rolls-Royce disappeared into the rain, Alex's father, Daniel, stepped out of the building, his uniform damp and his face lined with exhaustion. He noticed Alex standing under the street lamp holding the umbrella as though guarding a treasure. "Alex," Daniel called, his voice warm but tired. "What are you doing out here? You'll catch a cold." Alex ran over, his sneakers splashing through puddles. "I was waiting for you, Dad." He handed the umbrella to his father, his small hands trembling from the cold. Daniel frowned as he looked at his son. Alex's jacket was soaked, and his cheeks were flushed from the biting wind. "You should have stayed inside," Daniel said gently, wrapping his arm around Alex and guiding him toward the bus stop. "I wanted to help," Alex replied. "There was this man outside the building. He was in the rain, and I thought I could hold my umbrella for him." Daniel stopped in his tracks. "What man?" Alex shrugged. "The one with the fancy car. He looked really angry." Daniel's expression darkened. He didn't need Alex to describe him further. He knew exactly who it was, Ethan Carter, the building's owner. Over the years, Daniel had seen Ethan visit the property a handful of times, always with the same air of arrogance and entitlement. "You don't need to waste your kindness on people like him," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "But Dad," Alex said, looking up at him, "isn't it good to help people, even if they don't say thank you?" Daniel sighed, crouching down to meet Alex's gaze. "Yes, son, it's good to help people, but some people don't see kindness the way you do. They think it makes you weak." "Does it?" Alex asked. "No," Daniel said firmly. "It makes you strong, stronger than they'll ever be." The bus ride home was quiet, the rain drumming against the windows. Alex stared out at the city lights, his thoughts drifting to Ethan. He couldn't understand how someone so rich and powerful could seem so empty. When they arrived at their modest apartment, Daniel set his bag down and immediately began preparing dinner. Alex tried to help, but his father waved him off. "You've already done enough today," Daniel said with a tired smile. As they sat down to eat, Alex noticed the deep lines on his father's face, the calluses on his hands. His dad worked harder than anyone Alex knew, but it never seemed to be enough. "Dad, do you ever wish you didn't have to work so much?" Alex asked suddenly. Daniel paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Of course I do, but life doesn't give you what you wish for. It gives you what you fight for. And I'm fighting for you, Alex." Alex nodded, though his chest felt tight. He didn't want his dad to have to fight so hard. One day, Alex promised himself, he would make things better. That night, as Alex lay in bed listening to the rain, he thought about Ethan Carter again. Why had the man been so angry? Why had he refused help? Alex didn't understand it, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. He didn't know that the events of that evening were setting the stage for a lesson that would change not just Ethan's life, but his own. The next morning, Ethan Carter sat at the head of the long, polished conference table in his private office. The room was immaculate, its modern decor a testament to his taste for luxury. Yet, Ethan's mood was far from celebratory. The documents for his meeting with Marcus Steele lay spread out before him, but his mind wasn't on the deal. Instead, his thoughts kept circling back to the boy from the previous night. Why does this even matter? He asked himself. Yet, he couldn't shake the boy's words or the strange pang of guilt that had settled in his chest. Ethan shook his head, forcing himself to focus. Marcus Steele wasn't someone he could afford to take lightly. A billionaire in his own right, Steele had built his fortune on charisma, cunning, and a reputation for playing mind games. Unlike Ethan, who operated with sheer determination and control, Marcus thrived on unpredictability. Their upcoming deal was the biggest collaboration either had ever attempted, a luxury real estate project that would redefine urban living. But Ethan knew Marcus didn't make deals for the sake of profit alone. He made them to test people, to see if they were worthy of being in his circle. At precisely noon, Ethan arrived at the Regent, a grand hotel that Marcus owned. The private dining room was opulent, with towering windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Marcus was already seated, his signature grin plastered across his face. "Ethan Carter," Marcus said, standing to shake his hand. "The man of the hour. Or, should I say, the man with the most to prove. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. Marcus, always a pleasure. As they sat down, the tension between them crackled like static electricity. Marcus leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine. You know, Ethan, this deal is more than just business to me. It's about trust, compatibility, knowing we're on the same page. I assure you my track record speaks for itself, Ethan replied, his tone clipped. Ah, but numbers don't tell the whole story, Marcus said, his grin widening. I like to test people in ways that spreadsheets can't measure. Ethan's brow furrowed. What are you getting at? Marcus took a sip of his wine, savoring it. I have a little tradition. Before I finalize any major deal, I like to take my potential partners on a journey. A journey? Ethan echoed, his skepticism evident. Marcus nodded. A glimpse into my world. You could call it a test of character. Ethan's patience was wearing thin. I don't see how this is relevant to our deal. Oh, it's very relevant, Marcus said, his voice soft but firm. If you want to build something extraordinary, you need to understand the people who make it possible. Not just the ones at the top, but the ones at the bottom. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? Marcus's smile turned enigmatic. Let's just say you'll have to trust me on this one. That evening, Marcus and Ethan met again, this time at a location far removed from their usual world of luxury. Marcus led Ethan to a modest apartment building in the heart of the city, a place Ethan vaguely recognized. What are we doing here? Ethan asked, his tone impatient. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knocked on the door of one of the units. When it opened, Ethan was startled to see a familiar face. Daniel, the janitor from his building. Good evening, Daniel, Marcus said warmly. May we come in? Daniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering to Ethan. Of course, he said finally, stepping aside. The apartment was small but spotless, filled with the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal. Alex sat at the kitchen table, his eyes widening when he saw Ethan. You, Ethan said, his voice sharp with recognition. Alex looked away, unsure how to respond. Marcus, however, seemed unfazed. Ethan, meet Daniel and his son Alex. Daniel's been a friend of mine for years. In fact, he once did something for me that I'll never forget. Ethan frowned. What's your point, Marcus? My point, Marcus said, his tone shifting to one of quiet authority, is that the people we often overlook are the ones who keep our world running. People like Daniel, who work tirelessly with no recognition. People like Alex, who offer help even when it's refused. Ethan felt a prick of discomfort, but quickly masked it with indifference. I don't see what this has to do with our deal. Oh, it has everything to do with it, Marcus said, his eyes gleaming. You see, Daniel saved my life once, years ago. When I was at my lowest, he gave me a job and a place to stay. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today. Ethan stared at Marcus, stunned. And now, Marcus continued, I make it a point to never forget where I came from, or the people who helped me along the way. That's what this project is about, Ethan. It's not just about luxury. It's about creating something that uplifts everyone involved. Ethan didn't know how to respond. For the first time in a long time, he felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, humility. Ethan Carter sat in stunned silence, the weight of Marcus Steele's words pressing down on him like a storm he couldn't control. The modest apartment around him felt smaller with each passing moment, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Alex, the boy he had dismissed just the night before, now sat across from him, watching with quiet curiosity. Daniel, the janitor he had passed countless times in the lobby of his office building, stood beside Marcus, his posture both humble and proud. Ethan's throat felt dry. So, what's the point of this? He finally managed to ask, his voice sharper than he intended. Marcus's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet resolve. The point, Ethan, is that people like Daniel and Alex are the foundation of everything we build. Without them, there's no success, no empire. You, of all people, should understand that." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't see how this changes anything. Business is business." "Is it?" Marcus asked, his tone sharper now. "You think you built your empire alone, Ethan? You think your wealth makes you invincible? Let me tell you something. I've seen men like you rise and fall. The ones who rise are the ones who learn to value people, not just for what they can do, but for who they are." Before Ethan could respond, Alex spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "My dad always says kindness isn't a weakness, but you didn't even say thank you when I tried to help you." The words hit Ethan like a slap. For a moment, he was back on the rain-soaked street, the boy's small hand holding the umbrella, his eyes full of quiet determination. "I didn't ask for your help," Ethan said defensively. Alex shrugged. "That doesn't mean you didn't need it." The room fell silent, the weight of Alex's words hanging heavy in the air. Marcus watched Ethan closely, his expression unreadable. Finally, Ethan stood, straightening his jacket. "This has been enlightening," he said, his tone clipped, "but I don't see how it's relevant to our deal." Marcus's smile returned, but it was colder now. "Oh, it's very relevant, Ethan, because if you don't learn to see the value in people, I'm not sure you're the right partner for this project." Ethan froze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to know you can lead with more than just ambition. If you can't see the worth in people like Daniel and Alex, how can I trust you to build something that truly matters?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The implications were clear. If he wanted this deal, he would have to prove himself in a way he never had before. Later, that night, Ethan sat in his penthouse staring out at the glittering city skyline. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain. Marcus's words echoed in his mind, intertwining with Alex's quiet accusation. Kindness isn't a weakness. He thought back to his own childhood, to the days when he and his mother had struggled to make ends meet. They had relied on the kindness of strangers more times than he cared to admit. Somewhere along the way, he had buried those memories, convincing himself that he had climbed to the top on his own. But now, those memories resurfaced with a vengeance. He remembered the neighbor who had given them groceries when his mother couldn't afford to buy food, the teacher who had stayed after school to help him catch up on math, the boss at his first job who had taken a chance on him despite his lack of experience. Ethan rubbed his temples, frustration and guilt swirling inside him. For so long he had seen compassion as a liability, something that slowed people down, but now he wasn't so sure. The next day, Ethan arrived at the office early, determined to set things right. He spent hours reviewing his company's operations, identifying areas where he could make a real difference. He called his HR team and ordered them to implement new policies that prioritized the well-being of employees at all levels. But there was one more thing he needed to do. That evening, Ethan returned to the modest apartment building where Daniel and Alex lived. He knocked on the door, feeling an unfamiliar sense of nervousness. When Daniel opened the door, his surprise was evident. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan cleared his throat. "I need to speak with you and Alex. May I come in?" Daniel hesitated but stepped aside. Alex looked up from the kitchen table, his eyes widening when he saw Ethan. "I wanted to apologize," Ethan said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "for the way I treated you both. I was wrong." Alex blinked, clearly not expecting the words. "It's okay," he said after a moment. "No, it's not," Ethan said firmly. He turned to Daniel. "You've worked in my building for years, and I've never taken the time to acknowledge your contribution. That changes now. I want to promote you to building manager. And, Alex," he crouched down to meet the boy's gaze, "I've set up a scholarship fund in your name. It's enough to cover your education all the way through college." Alex's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. Then, with a small smile, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Carter." Ethan nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt like he had truly done something meaningful. Ethan Carter returned to his office the next day feeling lighter, but the storm wasn't over yet. He had made amends with Daniel and Alex, but his future with Marcus Steele and the deal that could define his career was still uncertain. Marcus had been clear. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about values. For the first time, Ethan wondered if he could measure up. He spent the morning reviewing his presentation for the deal, but something felt off. His usual strategies, emphasizing profits, projecting dominance, no longer felt right. Marcus wasn't like his other business partners. This deal required something more, something Ethan wasn't sure he had. As the clock ticked closer to their follow-up meeting, Ethan paced his office, replaying Marcus's words in his mind. Ethan arrived at the high-rise conference room with a rare mix of confidence and uncertainty. Marcus was already there, seated at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," Marcus greeted, gesturing for him to sit. "I trust you've had some time to reflect." "I have," Ethan said, his voice steady but lacking its usual edge. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands. "Good, because this is where we find out if we're truly on the same page." Ethan took a deep breath. "Marcus, I've spent my career chasing success. I thought that meant building bigger, faster, and stronger than anyone else. But I've realized something over the past few days. Real success isn't just about what we build. It's about the lives we touch in the process." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Ethan continued. "You were right. People like Daniel and Alex are the foundation of everything we do. They're the ones who keep our visions alive, even when we fail to notice them. I've been blind to that for too long, but I'm ready to change." The room fell silent as Marcus studied Ethan, his gaze piercing. Finally, he spoke. "Talk is cheap, Ethan. What are you going to do about it?" Ethan nodded, expecting the challenge. He slid a folder across the table. "This is a new proposal. It includes initiatives to improve working conditions for the people who maintain our properties, scholarships for their children, and mentorship programs to help them advance. I've also allocated a percentage of our profits to community development projects." Marcus opened the folder, scanning its contents. His expression remained unreadable, but Ethan noticed a flicker of something. Approval, perhaps. "Impressive," Marcus said finally. "But there's one more thing I need to know. Why?" Ethan met his gaze. "Because for the first time, I understand what it means to build something that lasts. Empires fall, Marcus, but legacies live on. I want my legacy to be more than just numbers on a balance sheet." For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he smiled, a genuine, approving smile. "Well, Ethan, it seems you finally learned the lesson I was trying to teach you." He extended his hand. "Let's build something extraordinary together." Ethan shook his hand, a sense of relief and pride washing over him. For the first time in his career, he felt like he was building something that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, Ethan Carter's life underwent a transformation. The deal with Marcus Steele was finalized, and their joint project became a symbol of innovation, not just in luxury, but in community impact. True to his word, Ethan implemented initiatives that prioritized the well-being of the people who worked for him, from janitors to executives. His company's buildings now featured on-site daycare centers for employees' children, scholarship programs for underprivileged youth, and wellness programs for workers at all levels. Ethan didn't just write checks. He became actively involved, personally meeting with employees to understand their struggles and aspirations. For Daniel and Alex, life changed in ways they could never have imagined. Daniel's promotion to building manager came with a substantial pay raise, allowing him to move Alex out of their small apartment into a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. But the biggest change was in Alex himself. One sunny afternoon, Ethan found himself at a local community center where a mentorship event for kids was being held. The event had been part of the new initiative he'd launched, aimed at empowering children from disadvantaged backgrounds to dream big and achieve their goals. Alex was there, standing in front of a group of kids, his voice confident as he spoke about kindness, determination, and the importance of never giving up. "My dad taught me that hard work can take you far," Alex said, smiling at Daniel, who stood proudly in the audience. "But I've also learned that helping others along the way makes the journey even better." Ethan watched from the back of the room, a quiet smile on his face. He had come to the event unannounced, wanting to see the impact of his efforts firsthand. Seeing Alex inspire other children filled him with a sense of pride that no business deal had ever given him. When the event ended, Alex spotted Ethan and ran over, his face lighting up. "Mr. Carter," he said, extending his hand. Ethan crouched down, shaking Alex's hand firmly. "Great speech, Alex. You've got a bright future ahead of you." Alex grinned. "Thank you, sir, and thank you for everything you've done for me and my dad." Ethan nodded. "You've taught me more than you realize, Alex. Keep being the person you are. It's going to take you far." That night, as Ethan sat in his penthouse looking out at the city lights, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. For years, he had measured success by the size of his bank account, the number of skyscrapers that bore his name, and the fear he could command in boardrooms. But now, he saw success in a different light. He saw it in the laughter of children at the community center, in the pride on Daniel's face, and in the determination in Alex's eyes. He saw it in the letters he received from employees thanking him for the changes he'd made in their lives. Ethan had built an empire, but for the first time he felt like he was building a legacy. Ethan's transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it complete. He still struggled with his old habits, his need for control, his aversion to vulnerability, but he was learning day by day that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about standing together. As he prepared to turn in for the night, Ethan thought back to Alex's words on that rainy evening. "Even the strongest storms need someone to hold an umbrella." He smiled to himself. Alex was right, and Ethan was finally learning to weather life's storms, not by conquering them alone, but by embracing the people who stood by his side. Moral takeaway of the story is: success isn't measured by wealth, power, or the empires we build. True success lies in the lives we touch, the kindness we show, and the legacy we leave behind. Even the strongest storms are easier to face when we allow others to share their umbrellas.